China has blasted the United States for flying a pair of B-52 bombers near disputed islands in the South China Sea, further fueling tensions between the two countries. The Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying accusing the U.S. of stirring up trouble and warning China will not be threatened by any military warships. Hua said that China would do whatever is necessary to protect its sovereignty. The bombers flew near Scarborough Shoal, which China seized from the Philippines 6 years ago. The flyby occurred after U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis accused China of intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea.
Yet China's policy in the South China Sea stands in stark contrast to the openness of our strategy. It promotes what our strategy promotes. It calls in to question China's broader goals. China's militarization of artificial features in the South China Sea includes the deployment of anti-ship missiles, surface-to-air missiles, electronic jammers, and more recently, the landing of bomber aircraft at Woody Island. Despite China's claims to the contrary, the placement of these weapon systems is tied directly to military use for the purposes of intimidation and coercion. China's militarization of the Spratlys is also in direct contradiction to President Xi's 2015 public assurances in the White House Rose Garden that they would not do that.
A flyby of a Chinese-held shoal in the South China Sea by U.S. B-52 bombers sparked harsh words from Beijing on Wednesday, the latest sign in escalating tensions between the two military powers. China Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying warned the U.S. on Wednesday against hyping up militarization and stirring up trouble at a daily briefing in Beijing, according to the Associated Press. The U.S. doing whatever they want is risky and China will not be threatened by any military warships, Hua said, adding that China would take all necessary measures to defend its sovereignty. Last month, China announced it had dispatched warships to drive away two U.S. Navy vessels sailing close to islands claimed by China in the Paracel Island chain after it had landed strategic bombers on an airstrip for the first time. Naval confrontation came shortly after the Pentagon withdrew its invitation for China to participate in multinational naval exercises near Hawaii to protest China's military moves in the South China Sea. The initial move to place the weapons on the island angered U.S. officials who immediately disinvited China from the rim of the Pacific exercises. U.S. officials told the Reuters news agency that the United States had already examined plans for an aircraft carrier passage once this year but ultimately did not pursue them, perhaps because of concerns about upsetting China. Despite rising tensions, Mattis is expected to visit Beijing at an unannounced date. China's defense ministry has said it would welcome Mattis and hoped for continued exchanges with the U.S. military.
We welcome to VOA Asia Bonnie Glaser. Bonnie is a senior advisor for Asia and the director of the China Power Project at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington. Bonnie, thanks for being with us. We know that China is claiming the entire South China Sea, plus more than that. What does the U.S. want them to do? Has the United States expressed anything definitive?
Well, over the years, not only in the Trump administration, but also in the Obama administration, the United States has called for China to not increase tensions, to exercise self-restraint, to negotiate a code of conduct with the other claimants and frankly, all of Southeast Asia, that are these 10 countries that are members of ASEAN, so that they can peacefully manage their disputes. And the United States has essentially asked China, as it has asked all countries, to abide by international law. And there was an arbitral tribunal finding in July of 2016 that the 9-dash line does not have any legal standing. And therefore claims that any country makes to any land features in the South China Sea and water has to be in accordance with the Convention on the Law of the Sea. So if you claim water, it has to extend from land. China continues to say that it has some ill-defined claim of historic rights and jurisdiction over a large swath of the waters in the South China Sea. And so I do think that the United States has been clear about what all countries should do, and it is not singling out China. There should be no militarization, no construction of fake islands, and everybody should abide by law and look for peaceful ways to manage disputes.
But China is paying no attention to those pleas.
Well, that's pretty much correct. China has, I think, a blueprint for what it wants to do in the South China Sea. It continues to militarize its islands. It continues to intimidate and bully its neighbors. It has recently threatened both the Philippines and Vietnam with military force if they go ahead and exploit energy reserves, energy deposits that are inside their legal maritime boundaries, what's known as the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. That's very much illegal. So when the U.S. says the rights of small countries and large countries alike should be respected, it has those kinds of actions in mind. So the Chinese indeed are really not exercising self-restraint at all. They are then there will never be any real use of the military capabilities to fight each other. I don't see any near-term solution unless China decides that its relations with the rest of the region are more important than what it's trying to do in the South China Sea. Right now, China thinks it can have its cake and eat it too. It can have both the good relations with the region, and it can build up these military outposts. And as long as it sees it can do both, it will do both. So the real question is how to shape a strategy that forces China to choose, and that can only be done if the claimants and the other members in ASEAN will stand up against China, push back and say, our interests matter too. But for obvious reasons, they're all afraid to do so. And they don't think that the United States has their back, and they're probably right.
Bonnie Glaser is a senior advisor for Asia and the director of the China Power Project at CSIS.